Hello, and welcome to this TIER webinar session. My name is Burnett Blake, a project coordinator for TIER. Today we are going to continue our discussion on behavior intervention within remote learning environments. This session is a continuance of our initial webinar series that was held at the beginning of September all the way until the 23rd of September. And so this session is just going to continue our discussion from our 23rd session, September 23rd session, where we were focusing on behavior. A few weeks prior to that, we had sessions on academics within remote learning environments. So if you're not able to join us those previous sessions, please feel free to join us on our website where all of those sessions are posted. On your screen, you have several icons that you can utilize. So you'll have your raise hand, ask a question. And so I am here to answer your questions. And as we move through the presentation today, please feel free to add your questions and then we'll compile them. And then we'll have time for questions throughout the presentation. Moderator, next slide. Thank you. Oh. So TIER is, for those of you that are not aware, is a network that is funded by TEA, and it provides comprehensive intervention best practices within MTSS framework for all Texas educators. So we are here to support you and to provide any guidance and support within the area of intervention. So today we have Dr. Shanna Hirsch from Clemson University. Super excited today. Most of our sessions have been with in-house TIER members, and so we are excited to have an external member to provide guidance and support within the areas of behavior intervention. So Dr. Hirsch, if you would like to introduce yourself, and we will move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Burnett. My name is Shanna Hirsch, and I am an assistant professor at Clemson University, and I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. So the content from today's webinar is based on professional briefs and evidence-based practices, as well as my own experience as a parent of a child who is currently learning remotely. So let's start off with our objectives. The three objectives for today is that we would like for you to receive some guidance on communication with families and students, then share some considerations related to interventions across tiers 1, 2, and 3 across remote settings. And then we'll conclude with a section on progress monitoring. So as we go through the webinar, you're going to hear me use a number of different terms. The first one is remote learning. So we use remote learning, virtual learning, distance learning, e-learning to really describe the practice of providing instruction for students outside of the physical school setting. This form of education is provided remotely through technology, and it has existed for years, but has become much more common, obviously, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's also two terms related to instruction. So the first term is synchronous instruction, or synchronous classes or learning. And this method provides live instruction, whether it be individualized or small group or class-wide instruction in real time. And activities that are synchronous can be interactive discussions or guided practice. The other term that I'll use today is asynchronous instruction. And this is pre-recorded instruction that can be viewed at a convenient time for the student. Asynchronous learning can also include listening to podcasts or practice and review, or engaging in an online written discussion. This occurs at different times and at different places. Students can access content at their own time. Another form of instruction is hybrid or blended, which utilizes both elements of synchronous instruction and asynchronous instruction, or could incorporate some version of live or face-to-face instruction. So today I'm going to be sharing some guidance for you, but regardless of the model that you choose, it really starts with communicating with parents and students, or learning managers. So I'm going to use this term learning manager today. And a learning manager is an individual who assists a student with online or remote learning. A learning manager can be a caregiver, it could be a responsible adult, and it is really important as we start to think about how do we build these behavior interventions in remote learning spaces, while considering the role of the learning manager, because a learning manager is critical for students to participate online, and unlike face-to-face instruction, online teachers have a shorter period of time to really cultivate those relationships with students. So it's really important to start with working with the learning manager and communicating with families. So I'm going to share a few strategies with you, and you can take some notes, and you could view some of the information in the handout as well. So the first step is related to sharing information. So information can be shared with families and learning managers and students via video, email, or live meetings. One example is a teacher can host a virtual open house and walk learning managers through the online platform along with all of the associated activities. An open house also allows for learning managers to ask questions, troubleshoot. In addition, the teacher can host virtual office hours, which allows students and learning managers to just drop in, connect, ask questions, share information, or receive support. While it may be preferable to share information synchronously, teachers should also be prepared to share information asynchronously. These steps can be taken through video or email communication. There's so many different platforms that are available. One example is Flipgrid. This is a free platform that allows educators to share information or images, videos, and engage in an online conversation through text or comments or audio. And it's free, and it's available both as an app or it can be used online. There's information on Flipgrid in your handouts. Another step is to survey folks. So surveys are a really nice and efficient way to learn more about the student, as well as identifying potential barriers. And I would recommend surveying both the student and the learning manager. Surveys can ask questions related to a student's intensive needs, as well as the needs of the learning manager. Here are some sample questions. When I am teaching, I like to ask my students, what suggestions do you have to make learning more effective? Or what concerns or questions do you have at this time? And I would suggest sending these surveys out on a regular basis, not just at the beginning of the year. So when communicating with families, students, and learning managers, it's really important to consider accessibility. For instance, videos should include closed captioning. Programs such as Screenomatic make captioning free, and they're really easy to use. It's also important to share information in a student's home language. So any letters home should be translated, as well as daily work instructions. This will help the learning manager and the students. And of course, use clear, plain language to share information and concepts. Teachers can also set up a daily survey or a check-in on platforms such as Google Forms. Here's an example of a remote learning morning check-in that was used by a self-contained emotional behavior disorders teachers, or an EBD teacher. The teacher created specific questions related to her students' needs. The form asks students questions related to whether or not they would like help or would like the teacher to contact them, and how to contact them, as well as what time to contact them. So it's a great way to communicate with the students on a regular basis. Although online learning is primarily used for academic instruction, time should be dedicated to supporting students' mental health and behavioral needs. This can be done by posing 1 or 2 questions, inviting a student response at the beginning of a lesson. And it's a great way to gain feedback on a student's well-being, adjust instruction, or adjust deadlines too. And it can give some information to a teacher to follow up on afterwards. These frequent check-ins also help build a sense of community within the online learning environment for students too. These questions can be posted as part of an asynchronous learning by creating an ungraded survey. One program that I use is Pear Deck, and it includes questions like the one that you see on your screen, as well as other questions like, what is something that you're proud of, or what is something that you want your teacher or your peer to know? And instructors can opt to put these responses private, or they can share them anonymously with the class in an synchronous learning session. So as we move forward and we move away from that communication aspect, we're going to start to talk about considerations for behavior interventions in remote learning environments. So when implementing an intensive intervention online, it's really important to start with those foundational or tier 1 practices. These practices benefit everyone, including the student and the learning manager. So to start, integrating behavioral expectations into remote learning is key to implementing a behavior intervention. So this is done by developing, teaching, reviewing, reminding, reinforcing those predictable expectations. So on your screen, you have an example. You have a link to this resource also in your handout on page 4. This is from the Center on Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. So in conjunction with expectations, students should have those predictable routines. This includes a daily routine, such as one that's featured on the screen. You can set up a routine, post it on your learning management software, and then share it with students when they come to a synchronous meeting. Teachers can post those expectations at the beginning of those meetings, as I just said, and these expectations can be also included asynchronously in a video. In addition to providing the pre-correction to a specific expectation, teachers can remind students of the procedure as they get started, such as how to mute yourself or unmute, or to make sure that your video is on during a specific segment, if possible, or to have their videos off. So all of these things are really important just to set the foundation for that tier 1. Another important tier 1 component is reinforcement. So remote learning reinforcement looks different. Some students may be earning points for attendance and participation, and teachers can implement a class-wide group contingency during a synchronous meeting or an asynchronous work session. So group contingencies are a great way to reinforce 1 or more students online. And just as a reminder, a group contingency reinforces a student from meeting a predetermined goal by providing them with a reinforcer or a reward. So an example from my friend's classroom is that she is reinforcing her students when they meet synchronously. If the students they're receiving points for participation, and at the end of the synchronous meeting, they get to watch a fun online video or a song during the last couple minutes of class if they meet their goal. Another example is a teacher can place a point card at the top of the screen. And so they can have, students can be working on taking turns. I've heard some teachers saying that it's been really hard to have equity of voice. And so maybe the expectation is we're going to be respectful, and what respectful looks like in our synchronous learning is taking turns and letting everybody have an opportunity to speak. And so the teacher could have a point card and have that on the screen along with the goal and the reward, and students could earn points for taking turns during the 30-minute online meeting. And when the students take turns, they earn their points, and at the end of the 30-minute session, say they earn 10 points or 10 tally marks, then they can have a 5-minute online dance party. So just thinking about ways to engage students and reinforce them online for engaging in their appropriate expectations. It's also important to remember that students are individuals and that not all students are going to want that attention. These students may want to earn some extra time one-on-one with a student, or to play a game online with a peer. But at the same time, some students want to avoid attention, and perhaps they can receive a pass to skip talking in class, or they can receive a get out of work pass too. So we can provide opportunities for students to access reinforcement or avoid certain situations. Teachers can provide a menu of options and ask students to select the top 5 items. I think that's a great way to get student feedback, and I wouldn't just do it once, I would do it periodically, because we know reinforcement changes. So if you are looking for more information about Tier 1 practices, I highly suggest checking out the Positive Behavior Interventions Support Center. They have a number of resources on online learning, and there are links to these resources in your handout for today. Now let's take a minute to answer for any questions.
Yeah, so at this point we don't have any questions, but just to go back to the handout, just be sure the handout is actually posted. It should be a link for you to download it. It's saved as a PDF. So on your toolbar, you should see TIER Webinar Resource Behavior Intervention PDF. So if you're looking for that resource, it is there in all of the different platforms and handouts that Dr. Hirsch has referenced so far. They should be posted within there with an active link for you to click and to take a look at. So yeah, I think we're good to go.
Okay, great. Okay, so now that we have reviewed Tier 1 supports, let's discuss Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports and what they look like in remote learning. So I'm going to go back to the Center for Positive Behavior Supports again, because they have put out some amazing guidance documents about Tier 2 interventions, such as check-in, check-out. So Tier 2 intervention, check-in, check-out is an evidence-based Tier 2 intervention that can be implemented online. It was reviewed in a previous webinar, and I'm just going to briefly highlight it here. So check-in, check-out works because it adds increased positive adult interactions throughout the day. It adds structure to the school day or the remote learning day. And it provides instruction and practice on self-monitoring. And we know that students' needs change, especially when learning environments change. And so students, I would advise folks to reconduct a universal screening for behavior as well and wellness to help identify students who may need additional support, such as check-in, check-out. A family wellness check survey is one way that you might assess the student's needs and consider check-in, check-out. It is important as you get started with any intervention to orient both the student and the learning manager to check in, check out online. So this would include reviewing each person's role, practicing together, recording data, and giving feedback along the way. Likely you would need to adapt what you're doing in the classroom for a student's home environment. And that might mean changing the check-in, check-out card, the time of day, the activity, and revising the point goals. As part of the adaptations, teachers will want to plan a technology-based check-in with the learning manager on a regular basis. and would want to consider including other school personnel in the check-in. This is also a great way to include specials teachers, administrators, and paraprofessionals. And it's also important to think about different ways that technology can be used for rating. So I know some schools are using Google Forms for check-in, check-out, and others are accessing the check-in, check-out Swiss database. So there are technology-based options that are available. One of the most important components of check-in, check-out is reinforcement. So prior to starting check-in, check-out, be sure to identify reinforcements and a reward plan. So that's key here to clearly defining what the reward is, who is providing it, when the reward will be accessed, and if reinforcement is from the learning manager, it should be very clear what they are providing. For example, if the student meets their morning goal, the learning manager can provide an extra snack at lunchtime. If they meet their afternoon goal, maybe they're going to play an extra board game or get some extra time outside. School-based teams can also provide online or remote reinforcement. So it's not just relying on the learning manager for reinforcement, but reinforcement can be from the teacher, such as playing an online game or having some one-on-one time with the teacher. Another option is to send something home in the mail, such as a postcard or another tangible item. Okay. We're returning to our terms, both synchronous and asynchronous, but let's think about them in the form of reinforcement. So when we're discussing synchronous reinforcement, this occurs during a live meeting. So it could be delivering those points online during Google Meets, or asynchronous, it could be points for completing a lesson activity or a task on a student's own time. These points are frequently delivered for completing assignments rather than for the accuracy or getting the answer correct. So that's really important, so that if we're thinking about reinforcement for students in online settings, it's really valuable to think about the format of the reinforcement. So the PBIS Technical Assistance Center also published this great document. It's a brief regarding considerations for students with intensive needs, and they use these 5 items. They urge educators to connect, screen, support, teach, and monitor. And this applies to both in-person and remote learning settings, and to make adaptations as necessary. One of the key things in the report is that they urge teachers to make connections with those students and contact with families prior to the school year, as well as throughout the school year. And the brief provides both in-person and remote learning support suggestions. So let's, some of the key points on setting up an intensive intervention that the brief provided was scheduling that initial meeting. So really bringing the whole team together. That includes the learning manager and other family members, and setting up a time to really determine what is the best service. And this could be done on a Zoom call. It could also be done on a phone call. During the initial meeting, the team should develop a plan to connect throughout the school year. And this includes identifying whether it is best to hold regular conference calls, virtual meetings, along with what is going to be their frequent communication method. Is it going to be best to communicate regularly on email or phone or video? At this point, it's also really important to include other staff, as well as considering what would happen if an emergency situation should arise. Another key point is connecting students to their peers. I feel like this is so important right now for our students. And this can be done through peer counseling or skill building when a target student meets with a peer and practices a social skill. Teachers can host an online meetup, such as an online lunch buddy, where students can connect online, have lunch together with an adult being there virtually to facilitate the meeting. And throughout these experiences, I think it's really important for teachers to provide feedback. Another key point is that the report states it's really important to screen and conduct diagnostic, academic, and functional behavior assessments to identify areas of strength and to inform the selection and implementation of targeted and/or intensive and individualized supports. Kathleen Lane has put together a number of excellent resources on her website through the CI3T project. I highly suggest checking those out and reviewing their screening guidelines for remote learning. Another key point of that PBIS Technical Center brief is that you may work with students with disabilities who require additional layers of support. And in these instances, we really need to use data to guide the intensification and individualization of key practices. So as teachers look to integrate behavior supports at home, families and learning managers may need some additional visuals similar to the ones we use at school. For example, a class expectation poster could be hung up by the learning manager in the student's learning space. Another student may need increased numbers of check-ins throughout the day where adults are reviewing their goals and providing additional positive reinforcement. So it's important to think about those additional layers that we can bring into the home setting. The report also emphasizes the role of teaching within remote learning. As we shared earlier, teaching expectations, those tier 1 expectations and routines are vital to success. So I want to take a moment to just elaborate on that within the role of delivering an intervention. We need to teach routines both on the first day of remote learning, but continue to revisit them each morning or afternoon or each lesson as they occur. Just like we are meeting face-to-face with students, we need to remind them of those expectations, and that's really important to success here. And if a student or a group of students are frequently transitioning between remote learning and face-to-face instruction, then it's paramount to continue to teach the behavioral expectations for the specific situation. The examples on the right are taken from page 10 of the resource that I provided for you, and I highly suggest checking them out. This is in the one that's the PBIS Technical Assistance Center Returning to School, Considerations for Students with the most intensive behavioral needs. Again, the monitoring of behavior is critical. This means frequent collaboration with stakeholders and learning managers. Like in-person instruction, teachers should implement remote learning strategies and interventions with fidelity, adhering to the procedures that result in positive outcomes. It's critical that all stakeholders monitor and openly discuss whether their approach is feasible. Is it feasible for the learning manager? Is it acceptable? And is it perceived as effective? Monitoring a response to an intervention for a student receiving intensive interventions is so critical. There are a plethora of ways that teachers can conduct remote progress monitoring, and these on the screen are just a few examples. And we'll discuss progress monitoring in the next section, but I want to pause and I'd love to open it up if there are any questions.
Yes, Shanna. So we had one question where one attendee asked, where can we find those Tier 1 interventions? Where exactly are they located? One link I provided was pbis.org, of course. That is the one-stop shop for me when I was a classroom educator. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, so I think I would start with looking at what is your school currently doing? Are there Tier 1 practices in your building or in your district? And that would be one avenue, because you want to bring in the language of your school into your classroom. But yes, I would completely agree with Burnett. The PBIS Technical Assistance Center is my go-to resource all the time. And there are so many different resources on their website.
For sure. That was our only question. So I think we're ready to move forward. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. So we're going to take some time to look at progress monitoring within a remote learning environment. So it's possible that not all students will be able to participate in progress monitoring due to limited access to computers, internet, or family assistance. So my recommendation is to focus on continuing to provide high quality evidence-based instruction and use more informal approaches to monitoring progress when possible. So modifications may be necessary to accommodate distance-based administration. And that's important because the scores will be variable and there could be errors. So it's important to use data to guide instruction, absolutely. And if possible, to use data to make some really important decisions. But it's important to also interpret the scores with caution and gather multiple sources of data. And this website in front of you from Intensive Interventions provides a ton of information about progress monitoring virtually. So some of the information that they provide really prompts us to think about the data that we're collecting virtually. Will the data be valid? Will it be accurate? And will it represent the student's performance? And will it be feasible? So is it feasible to collect data in this context? Can I still use my progress monitoring data? And I can't answer those questions for you, but what I can tell you to do is to consider, the sources of data and what you plan to do with the data. And will it be useful to collect the data? I really like the idea of collecting some check-in, check-out data and using that to guide a conversation with the team. One thing that's really important to consider is the fidelity. Fidelity is referring to implementing all of the assessment procedures and intervention components consistently and accurately. On the screen, you can see examples of why fidelity is so important. Inaccurate assessment data and inaccurate intervention data can have a number of issues could arise. So perhaps you're implementing a Tier 3 FBA and the assessment component mismatches the function and or somebody fails to identify a skill deficit. So that is why assessment data is so important. We can also, if the assessment data is not if the assessment is not done correctly. Similar, if the intervention is not done or implemented as written, then it fails to produce a desired effect. So on the screen, you'll see a decision chart that we can use to help answer some questions. So the big picture here is we look at how a student is responding to an intervention. Is the intervention being implemented as it was intended and with fidelity? And if the answer is no, then we're going to need to increase our fidelity, right? We're going to need to do a better job of implementing this intervention. However, if the intervention was implemented with fidelity and the student isn't responding, then they're likely going to need to, we're going to likely need to combine and introduce, we're likely going to need to introduce another variable to see if we can improve student behavior. If interventions were implemented with fidelity, we should be asking ourselves these questions. How many days per week does the student receive the intervention? How many minutes does the student spend in the intervention per day? And could the mode of delivery be changed to create greater success? So if we have students that are not responding and our intervention is implemented with fidelity, then we could start to look at these variables. I also think it's really important to think about the reinforcement component. Is that being implemented? Because oftentimes that might be something that needs to be addressed and strengthened. So for more information on progress monitoring, I suggest checking out the TEA checklist from the April 14th webinar.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hirsch. You've been amazing. All the information you provided has been so helpful. And for sure, that handout is jam-packed full of resources that will help you everyone attend to their own individual needs per campus. And that's one thing you definitely highlighted was ensuring that all stakeholders take into consideration their specific populations that they serve and how we can ensure that all of the different guidance and support tools that we are utilizing are applied appropriately. So we are so grateful for having you here with us today. At this point, I do not see any questions, additional questions from our attendees, but I would like to take the time to express that we do have a very short 2-question survey at the end, just to let us know how this content was helpful for you. I see thank yous in the chat box, so thank you all for attending. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to TIER. We are more than welcome or more than happy to attend and assist to you guys and give you any sort of guidance. Also, you can email us at tier@meadowcenter.org. And we can usher any questions on to Dr. Hirsch if you have any questions later on. So some more thank yous in the box. Thank you guys so much. And we hope that you guys have a great rest of your day. And I hope you come back to see us for other webinars. Thank you. Bye.